reflections across champagne flutes and diamond jewelry. Lena Morrison stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, her red silk gown flowing around her like liquid confidence. She'd chosen red deliberately. Not the soft pink Richard preferred, not the modest beige his mother suggested. Red. Bull. Unignorable. She walked through the crowd with her head high, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. 5 years of marriage had taught her how to wear a mask. 5 years of slowly disappearing into the background of her own life. But tonight was different. Tonight everything would change. The Bennett family table sat elevated on a platform near the stage. Prime location. Premium visibility. Exactly where the most important people at any Morrison Holdings event always sat. Lena's heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached, her small clutch held tight in her hands. Richard saw her coming. She watched his expression shift from surprise to annoyance in the span of a heartbeat. He was already seated, his arm draped casually over the back of the chair beside him. The chair that should have been hers. But it wasn't empty. Candace Wright sat there instead, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She laughed at something Richard's father said, touching Richard's arm with familiar ease. Lena stopped at the edge of the platform. Richard. Her husband turned, his handsome face arranging itself into an expression of mild irritation. Like she was an acquaintance he'd forgotten about, not his wife of 5 years. Lena. What are you doing here? His tone suggested she'd crashed a party rather than attended the event she'd been invited to. The event she'd actually organized, though he didn't know that. I'm your wife. Where else would I be? Richard's mother, Patricia, set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Darling, the family table is quite full. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere. The word stung. Elsewhere. Like Lena was excess baggage, an inconvenience to be shuffled aside. There's space right here. Lena gestured to the chair Candace occupied. Richard actually laughed. The sound carried across nearby tables, drawing attention. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Lena, don't make a scene. He stood, his tall frame imposing, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow still felt like a shout. Candace is here as a family friend. Mother specifically requested her presence. You know how important tonight is for the Bennetts. Just go sit in the back and stop embarrassing yourself. Family friend. That's what they were calling her now. The woman who sent late-night texts to Lena's husband. The woman Richard met for business lunches that stretched into evenings. The woman whose perfume Lena had smelled on Richard's collar more times than she could count. Richard, this is inappropriate. Lena kept her voice steady, but something in her chest was cracking. 5 years. 5 years of making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. And here she stood, being dismissed like hired help at an event in her own building. What's inappropriate is you making demands. Richard raised his voice just enough that the nearby tables could definitely hear. I told you to dress appropriately. I told you this was a Bennett family event. And yet you show up dressed like you're trying to get attention, acting entitled to a seat you haven't earned. The word hit like a slap. James Bennett, Richard's father, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Patricia pursed her lips and looked away, examining her manicured nails. Candace watched with barely concealed satisfaction, her red lips curved in a small smile. Lena felt the weight of 100 gazes. The ballroom had gone quiet enough that the string quartet's music seemed too loud. She recognized faces in the crowd. Business executives. Board members. Her board members, though they didn't know she knew who they were. And the staff. The catering staff, the event coordinators, the security personnel. They stood frozen, watching this moment with something like horror in their eyes. Because they knew. They all knew who she really was. But they stayed silent, bound by the confidentiality agreements she'd insisted upon years ago when she decided to keep her identity secret. When she thought she was protecting something precious by hiding who she truly was. Richard picked up his champagne flute, raising it slightly in a gesture of dismissal. The tables in the back are perfectly adequate, Lena. You'll be fine there. Now if you'll excuse us, we're waiting for the program to start. He waved her away. Actually waved his hand like she was a bothersome insect, the champagne sloshing in his glass. The gesture was so casually cruel, so publicly humiliating, that for a moment Lena couldn't breathe. Patricia smiled tightly. Do run along, dear. I'm sure you understand. Lena stood there for 3 long seconds. Long enough to memorize every face at that table. Long enough to let the moment sear itself into her memory. Long enough to feel the final thread of whatever love she'd once felt snap completely. Then she turned. The walk across the ballroom felt endless. Her red dress caught the light with each step. People stared, some with pity, others with curiosity. A few looked away, embarrassed to witness such a public rejection. Lena found a table near the back. Not the very last row, but close enough. Close enough to be a clear statement of her place in Richard's hierarchy. The table had a good view of the stage, at least. She'd planned that 2 months ago when the seating arrangements were being finalized. She sat down carefully, smoothing her dress. The chair felt smaller than the ones at the front. Everything felt smaller from back here. A waiter approached nervously. "Mrs. Morrison, I mean Mrs. Bennett, can I get you anything?" He'd almost used her real name. Her maiden name. The name that meant something in this city, in this industry, in this very building. "Water, please." "Thank you." The young man hurried away and Lena was left alone at the table. Around her, other guests settled into their seats, the buzz of conversation returning to normal levels. The drama was over. Richard had won. Except he hadn't. Lena opened her small clutch and pulled out her phone. 7 text messages from Grace, her assistant. Her real assistant, the one who worked for Morrison Holdings, not the life coach Richard thought she was seeing. "Grace, everything ready. Say the word." "Grace, security briefed. Lawyers on standby." "Grace, the staff is upset. They want to intervene." "Grace, tell me you're okay." "Grace, Lena, please respond." "Grace, I'm watching from the control room. I'm so sorry." "Grace, you're stronger than all of them combined. Remember that." Lena typed back quickly, "I'm fine. Proceed as planned." She set the phone down and looked around the ballroom. Really looked at it. The marble columns she'd chosen. The chandelier she'd selected. The artwork on the walls from her father's private collection. Every detail of this room had been approved by her, designed by her, paid for by her. The grand ballroom at Morrison Tower. The crown jewel of her late father's empire. The empire she'd inherited at 27, shell-shocked and grieving, trying to hold together a multi-billion-dollar company while the world told her she was too young, too inexperienced, too emotional. She'd proven them wrong. Quietly. Privately. Building her father's legacy into something even greater while hiding behind lawyers and proxy votes and carefully maintained anonymity. And then she'd met Richard. Charming, attentive Richard, who'd pursued her at a charity event without knowing who she was. Who'd made her laugh for the first time since her father's death. Who'd promised her a partnership, a future, a love that would last forever. She'd wanted so desperately to believe him. Wanted so desperately to be loved for herself, not for her money or her name or her company. So she'd kept her secret. She'd played the part of a woman with a modest trust fund, enough to be comfortable but not remarkable. She'd let Richard believe he was the successful one, the powerful one, the one who mattered. And slowly, year by year, he believed it more and more. Until she barely existed in his world at all. The lights began to dim. The string quartet finished their piece with a flourish. A spotlight illuminated the stage. Lena sat up straighter in her chair at the back of the ballroom. At the table where her husband had sent her. At the table she'd sat at deliberately, waiting for this exact moment. From the front of the room, she could see Richard leaning back in his chair, comfortable and confident. Patricia was laughing at something James said. Candace was checking her reflection in a compact mirror. None of them were paying attention to the stage yet. None of them had read the program carefully. None of them had questioned why a Bennett family dinner was being hosted at Morrison Tower, by Morrison Holdings, at a gala celebrating the company's new direction. The MC walked to the microphone. Lena recognized him. Jeffrey Santos, her director of communications. He'd been with the company for 15 years, had known her since she was a teenager visiting her father's office. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us tonight." Richard glanced at the stage, his attention finally caught. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate not just business success, but legacy. The legacy of Thomas Morrison, who built this company from nothing into one of the most respected corporations in the nation." Lena saw Richard frown slightly. The program had said this was a Bennett family event. But here was someone talking about Morrison Holdings. "And tonight, we celebrate the woman who has taken that legacy and elevated it beyond anything we could have imagined. A woman who has led this company with vision, integrity, and strength for the past 5 years." Patricia leaned toward Richard, whispering something. Richard shook his head, confused. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute honor to introduce the CEO and sole owner of Morrison Holdings, the woman whose leadership has brought us all here tonight." The spotlight swung away from Jeffrey, tracking across the ballroom. Searching. Lena stood up. The spotlight found her in the back, illuminating her red dress, catching the light in her dark hair. Every eye in the ballroom turned to follow the light. Please welcome Lena Morrison. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Total. The kind of silence that happens when everyone's understanding of reality shifts at once. At the front table, Richard's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It fell in slow motion, crystal shattering against marble with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet. His face had gone completely white. Lena began to walk. Not quickly, not slowly. Each step measured and deliberate. The spotlight followed her, turning her passage through the ballroom into a coronation march. Staff members she passed straight into attention. Board members she'd only met through video conferences stared in recognition. Business partners who'd only known her through representatives put the pieces together, understanding blooming across their faces. And at the family table, Richard stood frozen, his mouth open, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Because the man who'd sent his wife to sit in the shadows had just realized something terrible. He was sitting in her empire. He'd always been sitting in her empire. And now everyone knew it. 5 years earlier, the grand ballroom had looked different. Softer lighting, white flowers everywhere, and the kind of hopeful energy that only comes with new beginnings. Lena Morrison stood near the windows, 27 years old and feeling like she was drowning on dry land. The charity gala was for childhood literacy, a cause her father had supported for decades. It was the first major event she'd attended since his funeral 3 months prior. People kept approaching her with condolences that felt like tiny cuts. Sorry for your loss. He was a great man. He must be so proud. She wasn't proud. She was terrified. Thomas Morrison had died of a heart attack at his desk, reviewing quarterly reports. One moment he was calling Lena about dinner plans, the next moment his assistant was screaming for help. By the time Lena reached the hospital, he was gone. And he'd left her everything. The company, the fortune, the expectations. All of it dumped on her shoulders while she was still trying to figure out how to breathe through grief. You look like you're planning an escape route. Lena turned to find a man standing beside her. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. He wore his tuxedo like he'd been born in it, comfortable and confident. Is it that obvious? She managed a small smile back. Only to someone who's been mapping his own exits all evening. He extended his hand. Richard Bennett. Lena. She shook his hand, deliberately omitting her last name. She'd gotten good at that lately. Morrison carried too much weight, drew too many questions. Are you always this honest with strangers? Only the interesting ones. And you're definitely interesting. You've turned down 3 different men who tried to ask you to dance, avoided at least 6 networking attempts, and you've been standing in the exact same spot for 20 minutes. That takes dedication. Despite herself, Lena laughed. It felt foreign after months of tears. Maybe I just like this particular view. Of the parking lot? Richard glanced out the window at the street below. Bold choice. It's honest. No pretense. Just cars and street lights. Something in Richard's expression shifted. He studied her more carefully, and Lena realized she'd revealed more than she intended. Grief had a way of making you careless with your boundaries. Rough night? He asked, his voice gentler. Rough few months. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. The ballroom felt too cold suddenly. Sorry, I'm not usually this. Human? Real? Richard moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the night. I get it. These events are exhausting. Everyone performing their best selves, making connections, playing the game. Do you like the game? Some days. He shrugged. Other days I wonder what it would be like to just be myself without all the expectations. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The music drifted over from the orchestra. Couples spun across the dance floor. Everyone looked so certain of their place in the world. I lost someone recently, Lena found herself saying. My father. And everyone keeps telling me how strong I'm being, how well I'm handling it. But I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm faking my way through every moment. That is strength. Richard turned to face her. Real strength isn't pretending it doesn't hurt. It's hurting and showing up anyway. Lena looked at him, then really looked. His eyes were kind. That was what struck her most. In a room full of sharks and climbers and people calculating their next move, here was someone who seemed genuinely kind. Would you like to get out of here? He asked. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Much quieter. No one pretending to care about literacy while really caring about their stock portfolios. Lena knew she should say no. She didn't know this man. She had responsibilities, appearances to maintain. Her father's lawyer had warned her about people who might try to take advantage of her situation. But she was so tired of being careful. So tired of being the strong one, the responsible one, the heir to an empire she'd never asked for. Coffee sounds perfect. They slipped out together, leaving the gala behind. Richard didn't ask prying questions. He talked about movies he'd seen, books he'd read, a disastrous attempt at learning to cook that had ended with his kitchen covered in flour. Lena laughed more that night than she had in months. For a few hours, she wasn't Morrison Holdings' grieving heiress. She was just Lena, a woman having coffee with an interesting man. "Can I see you again?" Richard asked when he walked her to her car. "I'd like that." "Tomorrow? Dinner?" "Tomorrow." Lena smiled, and it felt real this time. That was how it started. Dinner turned into a second date. A second date became a third. Richard pursued her with the kind of attention that made her feel seen for the first time in years. He sent flowers to her apartment, not knowing it was a penthouse in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. He took her to small restaurants, nothing fancy, places where they could talk for hours without interruption. He told her about growing up as a Bennett, the pressure of family expectations, the constant comparison to his older brother. His father's disappointment that Richard had chosen venture capital instead of joining the family's traditional investment firm. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part," he admitted one night over wine. "Like the real me is buried under all these layers of what I'm supposed to be." Lena understood that feeling intimately. She was playing the biggest part of all, pretending to be someone ordinary when she was anything but. 3 months into their relationship, Richard said he loved her. They were walking through the park, autumn leaves crunching under their feet. He stopped, took both her hands in his, and said the words like they were sacred. "I love you, Lena. I know it's fast, but I've never been more sure of anything. You're real in a way no one else in my world is. You don't care about my last name or my connections. You just see me." Lena's heart swelled and ached at the same time. Because she did see him, but he didn't really see her. How could he, when she was hiding half of who she was? "I love you too," she whispered, and it was true. She did love him. She loved his kindness, his humor, the way he made her feel lighter. She loved that he'd met her in her grief and hadn't run away. But she didn't tell him the truth. Not then. They dated for a year before he proposed. By then, Lena was running Morrison Holdings from the shadows, her identity protected by layers of lawyers and proxy votes. The business world knew Thomas Morrison's daughter had inherited the company, but very few knew what she looked like or how involved she was. She liked it that way. It gave her freedom to lead without the constant scrutiny that came with being a young woman in power. Richard proposed at the same coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation. He got down on one knee in front of startled baristas and afternoon customers, holding out a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my partner. My best friend. My everything." Lena said yes. She said yes because she loved him, because she wanted to believe in the future they could build together. She said yes because she was tired of being alone in her grief and her responsibility. But she still didn't tell him the truth. The wedding was small, intimate. Richard thought it was because Lena preferred privacy. Really, it was because a big wedding would have drawn too much attention, would have made it impossible to keep her identity hidden. She invited a few college friends, distant cousins who wouldn't ask questions. Richard's family came, his parents gracious if a bit puzzled by their son's choice of a bride without an impressive pedigree. "She seems sweet," Lena overheard Patricia say to James at the reception. "Though I do wonder about her background. Richard's been quite secretive about her family. He loves her." "That's what matters," James replied, but Lena heard the doubt in his voice. On their wedding night, Lena almost told Richard everything. They lay in bed in their honeymoon suite, and she thought about how marriages shouldn't start with secrets. But Richard was talking about their future, about the life they'd build together, about how he'd take care of her. "You never have to worry about anything," he promised, kissing her forehead. "I'll always provide for you. Always protect you." And Lena stayed quiet. Because part of her wanted that fantasy. Wanted to be taken care of, protected, loved without complication. She'd been taking care of herself, making impossible decisions, carrying crushing responsibility since she was 27. Was it so wrong to want to lean on someone else for a while? The first year of marriage was happy. Richard was attentive, loving. They traveled together. He introduced her to his world, and she played the role of supportive wife perfectly. She attended his business functions, smiled for photographs, made conversation with his colleagues' wives. And in the hours he was at work, she ran Morrison Holdings. Video conferences with board members. Strategic planning sessions. Major acquisition decisions. She did it all from their home office while Richard thought she was shopping or having lunch with friends. The deception got easier with practice. She became skilled at compartmentalizing her life. Lena the wife versus Lena the CEO. Two separate people occupying the same body. But cracks started to show in the second year. Richard's company landed a major deal. He was ecstatic, celebrating like he'd won the lottery. He took Lena to an expensive restaurant, ordered champagne, told her how this changed everything. "I'm going to be managing $50 million, he said, grinning. "This puts me in a whole different league. Father's going to have to respect me now." Lena smiled and congratulated him. She didn't mention that Morrison Holdings had just closed a $2 billion acquisition that morning. $50 million seemed quaint in comparison, but she pushed that thought away. His victory was his victory. Her success didn't diminish his. Except it started to feel like it did. Because as Richard's career advanced, as he became more successful in his own right, his confidence shifted into something else. Activities. Maybe wear something more conservative to the dinner party. You want to make the right impression. Do you really need to spend so much time on your phone? It's like you're always distracted. I think you should consider joining the junior league. Patricia knows people there. It would be good for you to have real accomplishments to talk about. Real accomplishments. The word stung more than he knew. By year 3, Richard had stopped asking about Lena's day. He talked about his work, his deals, his stresses. She was supposed to listen, support, facilitate. Be the understanding wife who made his life easier. Lena tried to talk to him about it. "I feel like we're not really connecting anymore." "What are you talking about?" "We're fine. You're just being emotional." "I'm not being emotional. I'm trying to tell you how I feel." "Lena, I've had a long day. Can we not do this right now?" The dismissals became routine. Her feelings were inconvenient. Her needs were exhausting. She was asking too much, expecting too much, being too sensitive. And still she didn't tell him the truth. Because by then the truth felt like a weapon. If she revealed who she really was, it would prove that she'd been lying all along. It would destroy whatever remained of their marriage. She thought about divorce sometimes. Late at night, when Richard was asleep beside her and she felt completely alone. But divorce meant going public, meant explanations and complications. Meant admitting she'd failed at the one thing she'd wanted more than anything else. A genuine relationship built on real love. Year 4 brought Candace right into their lives. A friend of Patricia's daughter, young and ambitious and beautiful. She started appearing at family dinners, at social events. Always perfectly dressed, always saying exactly the right thing, always laughing at Richard's jokes just a bit too enthusiastically. Lena watched it happen with a strange detachment. She saw how Richard's eyes followed Candace across a room. How he stood up straighter when Candace was nearby. How he started spending more time at business meetings that conveniently ended near wherever Candace happened to be. She should have confronted him. Should have demanded answers. But she was tired. Tired of fighting for scraps of attention from a man who'd once looked at her like she hung the moon. 6 months ago she'd found the text messages. Richard had left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered. It had buzzed with an incoming message, and Lena had glanced at it without thinking. "Candace, last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you." The world had tilted. Lena sat down on the closed toilet lid, Richard's phone in her shaking hands. She scrolled through months of messages. Sweet words. Inside jokes. Plans to meet. Expressions of frustration about Richard's complicated situation at home. She put the phone back exactly where she'd found it. Said nothing when Richard came out of the shower. Made dinner. Smiled. Pretended. But something had broken that day. The last piece of whatever love she'd been clinging to had shattered as cleanly as Richard's champagne glass would later shatter at the gala. And Lena had started planning. She called Grace Torres the next day. Grace had been her assistant at Morrison Holdings for 3 years, efficient and discreet and fiercely loyal. "I need your help," Lena had said. "I need to end my marriage. But I need to do it right. Tell me what you need." What Lena needed was time. Time to document everything. Time to prepare the divorce papers. Time to position herself so that when she finally revealed the truth, she'd be standing on solid ground. And time to plan one perfect moment. One moment where Richard would finally see her, really see her, and understand exactly what he'd thrown away. "I want to announce my identity publicly," Lena had told Grace. "At the annual Morrison Holdings Gala. That's in 6 months." "I know. That gives us time to prepare. Time to make sure every detail is perfect." "And your husband?" "He'll be there. His family always comes to corporate events. They love the prestige." Grace had been quiet for a moment. You're going to tell him who you are in front of everyone. I'm going to show him who I am. There's a difference. So they planned. 6 months of careful preparation. 6 months of Lena playing the part of the dismissed wife while secretly arranging every detail of her reveal. 6 months of Richard treating her like she was invisible while she proved to herself and everyone else that she was anything but. And now, standing in the back of her own ballroom in her red dress with the spotlight following her forward, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt free. From her table in the back of the ballroom, Lena had a perfect view of everything. The angle was deliberate. When she'd reviewed the seating charts with Grace 3 weeks ago, she'd made sure this particular table had an unobstructed sight line to the family platform. You want to watch, Grace had said quietly. I need to see their faces. Every reaction. Every moment. Now, as the program continued and guests mingled during the cocktail hour, Lena observed Richard at the front table. He sat close to Candace, their chairs angled toward each other in a way that spoke of intimacy. His hand rested on the back of her chair. Not touching her exactly but claiming space. Claiming proximity. Candace Wright was beautiful in the way that seemed effortless but Lena knew cost hours of effort. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her dress was designer, something blue and expensive that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had the kind of laugh that carried across the room, musical and practiced. Patricia loved her. That much was obvious. Richard's mother leaned toward Candace frequently, touching her arm, including her in conversations. This was the daughter-in-law Patricia had probably always wanted. Someone from the right family, with the right connections, who understood how to play the society game. Everything Lena had refused to be. She remembered the first time she'd really noticed Candace. It was at a Bennett family dinner about 8 months ago. Richard had mentioned a friend of his cousins would be joining them, someone Patricia had wanted him to meet. She's involved in charity work, Patricia had said, her tone making it clear this was an accomplishment worth noting. The Symphony Board, the Children's Hospital Gala Committee. Very accomplished young woman. Lena had arrived at the dinner to find Candace already seated next to the chair that should have been Richard's. Her husband had been running late as usual. Candace had looked at Lena with an expression that seemed friendly on the surface but felt calculated underneath. You must be Lena. Richard's told me so much about you. Funny he hasn't mentioned you at all. Candace's smile hadn't wavered. Well, we've just started working together on a project. Venture capital funding for arts education. Richard's been incredibly helpful with the financial planning. That should have been Lena's first warning. Richard never worked together with anyone without there being something more. He collected people who could advance his status, his career, his ego. And Candace fit perfectly into that category. Over the following months, Candace became a regular presence in their lives. She appeared at every family gathering, every social event. Patricia started mentioning her constantly. Candace organized the most lovely luncheon. You should have been there, Lena. Oh, that's right, you had that appointment. What was it again? Lena never bothered explaining. Her appointments were board meetings, strategic planning sessions, acquisitions that would shape the future of Morrison Holdings. But to Patricia, they were just vague commitments that proved Lena wasn't really part of the family. And Richard had stopped defending her. Stopped including her. Started leaving her behind more and more often. The text messages she'd found 6 months ago had confirmed what she'd already known. Richard and Candace were having an affair. But seeing the words spelled out, seeing the intimacy captured in digital form, had made it real in a way her suspicions never had. Richard, I hate lying to her. But I hate my life with her more. Candace, you deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who understands you. Richard, she's so needy lately. Always asking where I am, what I'm doing. It's suffocating. Needy. Lena had read that word and almost laughed. She'd asked her husband basic questions about his schedule. She tried to maintain some connection to the person she'd married. And that made her needy. Candace, when are you going to tell her? Richard, soon. I just need to figure out the finances first. Make sure she's taken care of. Candace, you're so good. So caring. That's what I love about you. Lena had put the phone down after reading that exchange. Taken a deep breath. And started planning in earnest. Because Richard thought he needed to figure out finances. Thought he needed to make sure Lena was taken care of. Like she was a dependent, a burden, someone who needed his protection and provision. He had no idea that the money in their joint accounts came from her. That the house they lived in was purchased, he'd never questioned it. That every investment he thought was his success was actually bankrolled by her fortune. Richard thought he was the powerful one. Thought he was the one making sacrifices by staying in a marriage that didn't satisfy him. Thought he was being noble by planning to take care of poor helpless Lena when he finally left. Now, watching him laugh with Candace at the front table, Lena felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt. Just a vast emptiness where love used to live. A waiter approached her table. "Mrs. Bennett, can I bring you anything?" She almost corrected him. Almost said Morrison, not Bennett. But there were still 15 minutes until the main program started. 15 minutes to maintain the illusion just a little longer. "I'm fine, thank you." The waiter hesitated. "Ma'am, if I may say, you shouldn't be sitting back here." "It's where I was told to sit." "It's not right." The young man's jaw was tight. "We all know it's not right." Lena looked at him more carefully. She recognized him now. Daniel something, one of the catering staff Morrison Holdings used for all their events. He'd worked dozens of functions at Morrison Tower. He'd probably served her father. "I appreciate that, Daniel. But it's fine." "Really?" "No disrespect, ma'am, but it's not fine. None of us think it's fine." Around the ballroom, other staff members were watching. Lena saw the same expression on multiple faces. Anger on her behalf. Righteous indignation that their actual employer was being treated this way. "I promise you, everything is going to be okay." Lena kept her voice gentle. "Just a few more minutes." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding something in her tone. "Yes, ma'am. We're ready when you are." He walked away and Lena pulled out her phone again. More messages from Grace. "Grace, 10 minutes until showtime. You good?" "Grace, the board members are all here. Everyone who matters is watching." "Grace, I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud too." That last message made Lena's eyes sting. Her father. Thomas Morrison, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd taught her that real power didn't need to announce itself. Who'd always told her that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones everyone underestimated. "Be patient, Lena," he used to say. "Let them think they know you. Let them make assumptions. Then show them who you really are when it matters most." She'd been patient for 5 years. Patient through Richard's gradual transformation from loving husband to distant stranger. Patient through his affair, his dismissals, his casual cruelties. Patient while he made her smaller and smaller in his world. Tonight, she would show him exactly how wrong he'd been. At the front table, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed something to Candace. They both laughed. Patricia leaned over to see, joining in their amusement. James smiled indulgently at them all, playing the role of proud patriarch. This was the family that had rejected her. Not overtly, not with dramatic confrontations. Just with 1,000 small exclusions, a constant undermining of her worth, a steady message that she didn't belong. Patricia had once told her directly at a family dinner about 2 years ago. Richard had stepped away to take a call, and Patricia had fixed Lena with a cold stare. "You know, dear, I always thought Richard would marry someone more suitable. Someone with breeding, connections. Someone who could actually help advance the family name." "I love your son," Lena had replied quietly. "Love?" Patricia had waved a dismissive hand. "Love is fine for movies and romance novels. But real marriages, successful marriages, are about partnership. About two people who bring equal value to the table. And you don't think I bring value? I think you're a nice enough girl who caught my son at a vulnerable time. But honestly, Lena, what do you contribute? You have no career, no real accomplishments. You drift through life spending Richard's money and taking up space." Lena had excused herself from that dinner early, claiming a headache. She'd cried in her car for 20 minutes before driving home. Not because Patricia's words hurt in themselves, but because Richard had said nothing. He'd returned to the table, noticed Lena was gone, and simply shrugged. That night, she'd pulled up Morrison Holdings' quarterly reports. Reviewed the growth she'd achieved over the past 2 years. Looked at the jobs created, the communities impacted, the innovations funded. Reminded herself of who she actually was beneath the role she'd been playing. And she'd made a decision. She would stay silent a little longer. Would let them continue thinking she was nothing. Because when she finally spoke, when she finally revealed herself, their shock would be absolute. Grace appeared at Lena's table, materializing out of the crowd in her sleek maroon suit. She set down a folder, her expression carefully neutral for anyone watching, but her eyes were warm with concern. 5 minutes, Grace said quietly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm ready." "You look beautiful. That red dress was the perfect choice. I wanted to be visible. Wanted to make sure everyone saw where he sent me." Grace glanced toward the front table, her jaw tightening. "He's about to regret every choice he's ever made." "Not every choice." Lena followed Grace's gaze. The affair, the dismissals, treating me like I'm invisible. Those he'll regret. But marrying me? That was probably a genuine mistake on both our parts. We were never actually compatible. I just didn't want to see it. He didn't deserve you. No, he didn't. But I also shouldn't have lied to him. Two wrongs don't make a right. I own my part in this disaster. Grace sat down in the empty chair beside Lena. You going to be okay? Seeing his face when you tell everyone? I think so. I've played this moment in my head so many times. Sometimes I imagined he'd look devastated. Sometimes I thought he'd be angry. But you know what I actually think will happen? What? I think he'll be humiliated. And that's different from devastated. Devastation means you've lost something you valued. Humiliation means everyone else sees your failure. That's harsh. That's honest. Richard doesn't actually love me anymore. He hasn't for years. But he values his reputation, his status, his image as a successful man. And tonight, everyone's going to know that he's been diminishing the woman who's worth more than his entire family combined. The lights began to dim slightly, signaling the program was about to begin. Grace squeezed Lena's hand once, then stood. Knock them dead, boss. Grace disappeared into the crowd, heading toward the control room where she'd coordinate the technical aspects of the reveal. The video presentation Lena had approved last week. The documents that would appear on screens throughout the ballroom. The carefully choreographed moment when everything would become clear. Jeffrey Santos returned to the stage, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. Conversations died down. Guests found their seats. At the front table, Richard settled back comfortably, Candace at his side, Patricia and James flanking them like royal guards. They looked so confident. So certain of their place in the world. So completely unaware that everything was about to change. Lena smoothed her red dress one final time. Checked her reflection in her phone screen. Took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she'd been planning for 6 months. The moment that would end her marriage and reveal her truth. The moment that would prove to everyone, including herself, that she was not invisible. That she had never been nothing. That she was and always had been someone worth seeing. Jeffrey began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent sound system. Lena's sound system. In Lena's building. At Lena's event. And Richard had no idea. The spotlight was brighter than Lena had expected. It caught her directly in its beam, turning everything beyond its circle into darkness. But she didn't need to see the crowd to know what was happening. She could feel the shock rippling through the ballroom like a physical force. Each step toward the stage felt weighted with purpose. Her red heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. People shifted in their seats, craning their necks to watch her pass. Whispers started, soft and confused. Is that his wife? Why is she walking to the stage? Did he know about this? At the front table, Richard had frozen completely. His shattered champagne glass lay in pieces around his feet, liquid spreading across the marble. Candace's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. Patricia had half risen from her seat, as if she might intercept Lena, then sat back down heavily. James just stared, his face blank with incomprehension. Lena kept walking. She'd practiced this walk in her penthouse, had measured out the exact distance, had timed her pace. Confident but not rushed. Steady but not hesitant. The walk of someone who belonged exactly where she was going. The stage stairs appeared in front of her. Jeffrey Santos stood at the top, extending his hand to help her up. His eyes were bright with something like pride. You've got this, he murmured as she passed him. Lena stepped up to the microphone. The entire ballroom lay before her, hundreds of faces turned toward the stage. She recognized most of them. Board members from Morrison Holdings. Executives from partner companies. Investors who'd bet on her father's vision years ago. Reporters from business publications who'd been invited to cover the gala. And in the front row, on that elevated platform, her husband's family sat frozen in a tableau of shock. Lena gripped the sides of the podium, feeling the solid wood beneath her palms. Real. This was real. After years of hiding, years of pretending, years of making herself smaller, she was finally standing in full view. Good evening, she said, and her voice was steady. I'm sure many of you are confused right now. Let me clarify. My name is Lena Morrison. I am the daughter of Thomas Morrison, founder of Morrison Holdings. And for the past 5 years, I have served as CEO and sole owner of this company. The whispers erupted into actual conversation. People turned to their neighbors, seeking confirmation that they'd heard correctly. At the front table, Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping backward. That's not possible, he said loudly enough to be heard. You're lying. Lena looked directly at him for the first time since taking the stage. I'm not lying, Richard. Though I understand why you'd think so. After all, I've been lying by omission for our entire marriage. She turned back to address the wider audience, ignoring Richard's stunned expression. My father built Morrison Holdings from nothing. He started with a single investment property and grew it into one of the most diversified corporations in the nation. Real estate, technology, sustainable energy, medical research. When he died 5 years ago, he left everything to me. His only child. His daughter, who'd worked beside him since she was 22 years old. Behind Lena, screens descended from the ceiling. Grace's timing was perfect. Images appeared showing Thomas Morrison at various stages of his career. Then pictures of Lena with her father at Morrison Holdings functions. Lena in her 20s, professional and serious, standing beside Thomas at board meetings and ribbon cuttings. Some of you knew my father personally. You remember him as a man of integrity who believed that true power didn't need to announce itself. He taught me that lesson well. Perhaps too well. A photo appeared of Lena at her graduation from business school. Thomas stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them beaming. When my father died, I was 27 years old and utterly unprepared. But I had good people around me. Our board members. She gestured to several men and women in the audience. Our executive team. Our legal counsel. They helped me navigate those first terrible months. They supported my decision to maintain a low public profile while I found my footing as CEO. Richard was still standing, but he'd gone pale. Patricia clutched his arm, whispering urgently. He shook his head, refusing whatever she was saying. And then I met someone. Lena's voice softened slightly. At a charity event very much like this one. Someone charming and kind who made me laugh for the first time since my father's death. Someone who pursued me without knowing anything about my background or my company. I convinced myself that was romantic. That it meant our connection was real. Another image appeared. A photo from their wedding day. Lena in a simple white dress, Richard in his tuxedo, both smiling at the camera. They looked happy. They had been happy, at least in that moment. So I made a choice. A terrible, dishonest choice. I decided not to tell him who I was. I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my money or my name. I wanted a relationship that existed separate from Morrison Holdings. I wanted to be just Lena, not Thomas Morrison's heir. She paused, letting that sink in. The ballroom was absolutely silent now. Everyone was listening, caught up in the story. For 5 years, I maintained that deception. I ran this company from home offices and video conferences while my husband thought I spent my days shopping and having lunch with friends. I made billion-dollar decisions while he made $50 million deals and felt proud of himself. I employed thousands of people while he told me I had no real accomplishments. Richard flinched at that. Good. He should flinch. I'm not telling you this to embarrass my husband. Lena kept her voice even, factual. I'm telling you because tonight marks the end of that deception. Tonight, Morrison Holdings enters a new phase. Under my leadership, this company has grown by 40%. We've expanded into 6 new markets. We've funded breakthrough medical research. We've created over 3,000 new jobs. The screens showed graphs and statistics. Revenue growth. Employment figures. Market expansion. All impressive. All proof of her competence. Tonight, I'm announcing several major initiatives. First, Morrison Holdings will be establishing a foundation in my father's name to support young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. We'll be providing not just funding, but mentorship and resources to help them build sustainable businesses. Applause started, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Lena waited for it to subside. Second, we're launching a new division focused on sustainable urban development. Cities that are livable, equitable, and environmentally responsible. This has been a passion project of mine for 2 years, and I'm excited to finally bring it into the light. More applause. Some board members were nodding, approval clear on their faces. This was their CEO. This was the woman who'd been leading them successfully for 5 years, even if some of them had only known her through video screens and proxy votes until recently. And third, Lena's voice hardened slightly. Morrison Holdings will be conducting a full review of all our partnerships and investments. We will be severing ties with any companies or individuals who don't meet our ethical standards, who don't align with our values of integrity, respect, and genuine partnership. She looked directly at Richard as she said this. His family had investments tied up in Morrison Holdings. Not direct investments, but enough connections that this review would definitely impact them. Patricia seemed to realize this a moment later, her face draining of color. I want to thank everyone who has supported this company over the past 5 years. Who believed in my leadership even when you didn't know who was actually leading. Who gave me the space to prove myself on merit rather than name recognition alone. Jeffrey stepped forward with a glass of champagne. Lena accepted it, raising it toward the audience. To Thomas Morrison, who taught me that real power is quiet until it needs to speak. And to New Beginnings, built on honesty instead of deception. The entire ballroom stood and applauded. It was thunderous, genuine appreciation mixing with shock and curiosity. Reporters were already typing furiously on their phones. Board members were smiling. Business partners were reassessing everything they thought they knew. At the front table, Richard remained standing, but now he looked small somehow. Diminished. All his confidence, all his casual arrogance had evaporated. He stared at Lena like she was a stranger. Because she was a stranger. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd dismissed and belittled and cheated on, had never actually existed. She'd been a performance, a role Lena had played while her true self ran an empire he couldn't have imagined. Candace was looking between Richard and Lena with dawning horror. Whatever she'd thought she was getting when she pursued Richard, it wasn't this. She'd thought she was stealing a successful man from a nobody. Instead, she'd helped destroy the marriage of one of the wealthiest women in the country. Patricia's mouth was opening and closing soundlessly about Lena's lack of accomplishments, her subtle digs about breeding and connections, her clear preference for Candace. All of it was echoing in the ballroom like accusations. James just looked tired. Like he'd known somehow that this night would come eventually. Lena set down her champagne glass. Now, please enjoy the rest of your evening. Dinner will be served shortly. And for those interested in learning more about our new initiatives, we'll be providing information packets and scheduling follow-up meetings throughout the next week. She stepped away from the microphone. Jeffrey caught her hand briefly, squeezing it in support, then released her. Lena descended the stage stairs, heading back into the crowd. People parted for her now. Not to let her pass to the back, but with respect. Deference. Several board members approached, congratulating her on the announcement. Business partners wanted to discuss the new Sustainable Development Division. Everyone wanted a moment of her time, her attention, her consideration. And Lena gave it to them. She smiled and shook hands and promised follow-up conversations. She was gracious and professional and completely in control. This was her element. This was who she actually was when not playing the role of diminished wife. Through the crowd, she could see Richard pushing toward her. His face was red, his eyes wild. Security started to move, but Lena shook her head slightly. Let him come. Let him have his moment of confusion and anger. He'd earned it through years of dismissing her. But before Richard could reach her, Patricia intercepted him. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a side door. James followed, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Candace. The Bennett family was retreating, regrouping, trying to figure out how to salvage something from this disaster. Let them try. Lena had just reclaimed her entire life in front of hundreds of witnesses. Whatever the Bennetts did next was irrelevant. Grace appeared at Lena's elbow. You were perfect. Absolutely perfect. How much time before Richard figures out how to corner me? Security is watching him. If he tries to approach you, they'll intercept. Just like we planned. Good. Lena accepted another glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Because I'm done with unplanned conversations with my husband. From now on, everything goes through lawyers. The divorce papers are in your car. You can have them served tomorrow morning if you want. I want. No point in dragging this out now that everything's public. Around them, the gala continued. Dinner was being served. The string quartet had resumed playing. But everyone was still talking about the revelation. About Lena Morrison, the secret CEO. About Richard Bennett, the husband who dismissed his wife at her own event. About the most dramatic family moment anyone had witnessed in years. Lena moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, deflecting questions about her marriage with professional grace. She was exhausted beneath her composed exterior, but she couldn't show it. Not yet. Not until she was safely alone and could finally let the weight of the evening settle. But for now, standing in her ballroom in her red dress with everyone finally seeing her, really seeing her, Lena felt something close to peace. She'd done it. She'd stood up. She'd spoken her truth. And the sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. Instead, it had opened up, making room for her to be fully herself at last. The applause was still ringing in Lena's ears when Richard finally caught up to her. Security had formed a subtle perimeter, but he was her husband. They couldn't completely block him. Not without causing more of a scene than had already occurred. He grabbed her elbow just as she was accepting another congratulations from a board member. His grip was tight enough to hurt. We need to talk. Now. Lena turned to face him calmly. Up close, she could see the panic in his eyes. The humiliation. The dawning understanding of how completely he'd misunderstood his entire life. I don't think we have anything to discuss tonight, Richard. Are you insane? He lowered his voice, but it was still harsh. You just announced to hundreds of people that you're some billionaire CEO. That's fraud. Identity fraud. You've been lying this entire time. I never lied about my identity. I just didn't advertise it. There's a difference. This is. Richard looked around, aware they were being watched. He pulled her toward a quieter corner, away from the main crowd. Security followed at a discreet distance. This is crazy. You run Morrison Holdings? You've been running it our entire marriage? Yes. Why? Why would you hide that? Lena studied him. Even now he didn't get it. He wasn't asking why she'd felt the need to hide. He was asking why she'd bothered hiding something so valuable, as if her identity was currency she should have spent. I wanted you to love me for who I am. Not for what I have. That's ridiculous. Love isn't separate from reality. You can't just decide to be someone else. I didn't decide to be someone else. I decided not to lead with my net worth. Big difference. Richard's jaw clenched. So all this time, while I've been working my ass off, building my career, you've been playing at being a housewife while secretly running a multi-billion-dollar company? I wasn't playing at anything. I was trying to have a marriage. Trying to build a life with you that wasn't about money or power. How noble. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Meanwhile, you made me look like a complete fool. Do you have any idea what people are saying right now? I just dismissed my own wife at an event she was hosting. I sent you to the back of the room in your own building. There it was. His real concern. Not that he'd hurt her, not that their marriage had disintegrated, but that he looked bad. That his reputation had taken a hit. You did dismiss me, Lena said quietly. And yes, it was my building. My event. My company. All things you would have known if you'd ever actually asked me about my life instead of talking at me about yours. Don't turn this around on me. You're the one who lied. I omitted information. You had an affair. Richard's face went white. What? I know about Candace. I've known for 6 months. He opened his mouth, closed it. Tried again. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I read your text messages, Richard. All of them. The ones about how needy I am. How you deserve better. How you're planning to leave me as soon as you figure out the finances. She smiled without humor. Turns out the finances are a lot more complicated than you thought. You read my private messages? You left your phone on the bathroom counter. It was unlocked. And honestly, I'm done feeling guilty about discovering your affair. You want to be angry at someone? Be angry at yourself. I can't believe this. Richard ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. Now it just looked like the performance it had always been. 6 months. You knew for 6 months and didn't say anything? I was preparing to leave you. Properly. With lawyers and documentation and a plan. Unlike you, who was apparently going to wing it once you figured out my non-existent finances. Patricia appeared then, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. James trailed behind her, and Candace brought up the rear, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Lena. Patricia's voice could have frozen water. I think we need to have a family meeting. Somewhere private. We're not family anymore, Patricia. So no, I don't think we need a meeting. Don't be absurd. You're married to my son. Not for much longer. Lena pulled an envelope from her clutch. She'd been carrying it all evening, waiting for the right moment. She handed it to Richard. Divorce papers. My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow to discuss proceedings. Richard stared at the envelope like it might explode. You can't be serious. I'm absolutely serious. Our marriage is over, Richard. It's been over for a while. Tonight just made it official. You don't get to just decide that. Patricia stepped forward. Marriage is a commitment. A covenant. You took vows. So did your son. He broke them when he started sleeping with her. Lena gestured toward Candace, who flinched. I'm just making it official. This is about money, Patricia said flatly. You've clearly had this planned for months. This whole evening was designed to humiliate Richard, to put him at a disadvantage before the divorce. Interesting that you think the truth is humiliating. And yes, I planned this carefully. Because I have resources to protect. Assets that have nothing to do with Richard, that he never contributed to, that he doesn't get to claim in any divorce settlement. We'll see what the courts say about that. Lena smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Please do take this to court. I'd love for a judge to review the timeline of your son's affair versus my business activities. I'd love for all of this to become public record. The devoted wife who secretly ran an empire while her husband cheated and belittled her. That's going to play great in the press. Patricia's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't dare. Try me? I've spent 5 years being quiet, being dismissed, being treated like I'm nothing. I'm done with silence, Patricia. If you want a public battle, I'll give you one. But I promise you I'll win. Because I have something you don't have. What's that? The truth. And unlimited legal resources. And a public relations team that's very, very good at their job. James finally spoke up, his voice weary. Patricia, let it go. Let it go? She's trying to destroy our son. Our son destroyed his own marriage. James looked at Richard with something like disappointment. You thought she was nobody. You treated her accordingly. Now you're facing the consequences. That's not on her. Dad. Richard's voice cracked slightly. You can't seriously be taking her side. I'm not taking sides. I'm stating facts. You had an affair, Richard. You dismissed your wife publicly. And it turns out she's been more successful than any of us knew. Those are all things you did or failed to notice. Not things she did to you. Patricia made a sound of frustration. This is absurd. Lena, be reasonable. Think about what you're throwing away. The Bennett name means something in this city. You can't just walk away from that. Watch me. Lena turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Patricia? About those investments your family has connected to Morrison Holdings? The ones I mentioned during my speech? We'll be reviewing all of those very carefully. If they meet our ethical standards, great. If not, we'll be divesting. Just thought you should know. She walked away before Patricia could respond. Security closed ranks behind her, a subtle barrier between her and the Bennett family. She could hear Richard calling her name, but she didn't turn around. She'd said everything she needed to say. Grace appeared at her side. That looked intense. It was necessary. He needed to hear it clearly. No ambiguity. No room for him to rewrite the narrative later. The press is asking for interviews. Tomorrow. Set them up for tomorrow. Tonight, I just want to get through the rest of this event and go home. Your home or the home you shared with Richard? Lena smiled. My home. The penthouse I bought last month. The one he doesn't know about. You really did plan everything. I had 6 months and a lot of anger. It focused me. They moved through the ballroom, Lena stopping periodically to greet guests, to accept congratulations, to reassure business partners that this personal drama wouldn't affect Morrison Holdings' operations. She was professional, composed, perfect. But inside she felt like she might shatter. The weight of the evening was catching up with her. The stress of the reveal, the confrontation with Richard, the years of living a double life. It all pressed down on her shoulders until she could barely breathe. I need air, she told Grace. They slipped out a side door onto a balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool against Lena's skin. Below them, the city sparkled with lights. Thousands of lives playing out in apartments and offices and streets. All those people living their truths while she'd been hiding hers. You okay? Grace asked quietly. I don't know. Lena leaned against the railing. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I just feel tired. That's normal. You just blew up your entire life. Did I? Or was my life already blown up? I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Grace was quiet for a moment. What Richard said in there about you making him look bad. That's not on you, Lena. He made himself look bad through his own actions. I know. But I did hide who I was. I did lie by omission. That's on me. You were trying to protect yourself. Trying to find genuine connection in a world where everyone wants something from you. That's not wrong. It wasn't honest though. And now I'm getting divorced and outing my identity and everything is going to be different. Everyone's going to treat me differently. Some people will. The people who matter won't. Lena thought about her father. About how he'd warned her that wealth and power changed relationships. How he'd told her to choose carefully who she trusted, because most people would see her resources before they saw her. She thought she could escape that by hiding. Turned out, you couldn't build anything real on a foundation of secrets. Not a company, not a reputation, not a marriage. I need to get back in there, she said, straightening up. People are expecting me to be present. You don't owe them anything more tonight. You've already given them enough to talk about for months. But I owe Morrison Holdings. My father's legacy. The employees who depend on this company. I can't fall apart just because my marriage ended. I have responsibilities. Grace touched her arm gently. Your father would want you to take care of yourself too. Not just the company. Right now, the company is easier to take care of than myself. So let's focus on that. They went back inside. The gala was winding down now. Dinner had been served and cleared. People were starting to leave, though many lingered, hoping for another glimpse of Lena, another conversation, another moment of drama. Richard and his family had left. Their table sat empty, a stark reminder of everything that had changed in a single evening. Lena found herself staring at it, at the space where she should have been sitting all along. Maybe if she'd sat there from the beginning, if she'd claimed her place instead of accepting Richard's dismissal, tonight would have gone differently. Maybe if she'd revealed her identity earlier, her marriage could have been saved. But probably not. The problems in their relationship went deeper than deception. Richard had wanted a wife who reflected his success, not one who outshone it. He'd wanted someone manageable, controllable, grateful for his provision. Lena had never been any of those things. She just pretended to be for far too long. The last guest trickled out around 11. Jeffrey approached with final details about cleanup and security. Grace coordinated with the staff about next steps. Lena stood in the center of her ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of her big revelation, and felt oddly hollow. She'd done it. She'd reclaimed her identity. She'd ended her marriage. She'd proven to everyone that she was powerful, successful, worthy of respect. So why did she feel so alone? Come on, Grace said, taking her elbow gently. Let's get you home. Real home. Your home. Lena let herself be led to the private elevator that would take them to the parking garage. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of the ballroom. Empty now, echoing. The scene of her transformation from invisible wife to visible CEO. Tomorrow the press would have a field day. Richard would hire lawyers. Patricia would plot revenge. Candace would probably disappear, realizing too late that she'd bet on the wrong person. But tonight, Lena was just going to go home. To her penthouse that Richard had never seen. To her space that she'd created just for herself. And she was going to let herself feel whatever she needed to feel without worrying about appearances or expectations or anyone else's opinion. She'd spent 5 years being who everyone else needed her to be. Tonight had been about reclaiming who she actually was. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out what that meant for the rest of her life. But tonight she was just Lena Morrison. Tired, honest, and finally free. The penthouse was dark and quiet when Lena arrived. She'd bought it under Morrison Holdings' real estate division, a corporate asset that happened to be perfectly suited to her personal needs. 27th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that reminded her of her father's old office. Grace had already been here earlier in the week, coordinating the move of Lena's personal belongings. Everything Richard didn't know about. Her files, her documents, her real life that had existed parallel to their marriage. Lena kicked off her heels in the entryway and walked barefoot across hardwood floors. The red dress whispered around her legs as she moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably still processing what had happened. Patricia was probably calling every lawyer she knew. Candace was probably wondering if she should apologize or disappear. Let them wonder. Let them spiral. Lena had spent enough time worrying about their feelings, their reactions, their opinions of her. Her phone buzzed. She'd been ignoring it for the past hour, but now she glanced at the screen. 47 text messages. 15 missed calls. Emails flooding in faster than her phone could notify her. Most were congratulations from business contacts. A few were interview requests from reporters. 3 were from her therapist checking if she was okay. And buried in the middle of everything else, a series of increasingly desperate messages from Richard. Richard, we need to talk. This isn't over. Richard, you can't just walk away from a marriage like this. Richard, at least have the decency to explain yourself. Richard, I deserve answers, Lena. Richard, call me. No. She deleted them without responding. He'd have plenty of opportunities to talk through lawyers. That was all the communication their relationship required now. Grace appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea. Thought you might need this. You didn't have to stay. Where else would I be? Grace handed her a mug and settled onto the couch. Besides, I want to debrief. That was the most dramatic event I've ever coordinated, and I once handled a product launch where the CEO got food poisoning mid-presentation. Despite everything, Lena smiled. She sat down beside Grace, curling her legs under her. It went exactly as planned. Better than planned. You were perfect up there. Strong, clear, no apologies. Your father would have been so proud. The mention of her father made Lena's eyes sting. He would have told me I waited too long. That I should have ended the marriage years ago when it became clear Richard wasn't who I thought he was. Maybe. Or maybe he would have understood that love makes us hopeful. Makes us believe things can change even when we know they probably won't. Lena sipped her tea. It was chamomile with honey, the way her father used to make it when she'd stayed late at the office studying spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I kept thinking he'd go back to being the man I fell in love with. That kind, attentive person who made me laugh and made me feel seen. People don't usually go backward. They evolve forward. Sometimes that evolution moves away from us. When did you get so wise? I've been watching you navigate impossible situations for 3 years. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Through the windows, Lena could see other buildings, other lit windows. Other people living their lives, dealing with their own complicated truths. The divorce is going to be messy, Grace said eventually. Even with the prenup clause. There wasn't a prenup. Grace nearly dropped her mug. What? How? He thought I had nothing. A modest trust fund, maybe some savings. Why would he need a prenup when he assumed he was the wealthy one? Oh, this is going to be spectacular. He's going to claim he's entitled to half of Morrison Holdings. Let him try. I have documentation of every business decision I made during our marriage. Proof that he contributed nothing to the company's growth. Proof that I was CEO before we even met. And the house you shared? Purchased with my money, though the paper trail is deliberately complicated. My lawyers have been preparing for this for months. Grace shook her head in admiration. You really did plan everything. I had to. Once I decided to leave, I couldn't afford any mistakes. Richard comes from money. His family has connections. If I didn't prepare properly, they could have made everything difficult. They're still going to try. Let them. I have something they don't have. Unlimited resources? Truth. Everything I've said, everything I've revealed, it's all verifiable. I didn't have to lie tonight. I just had to stop hiding. That gives me an advantage they can't counter. Lena's phone buzzed again. This time it was her lawyer, Harold Sterling. She answered on the second ring. I saw the news, Harold said without preamble. Very dramatic. Very effective. I assume you're ready to proceed with the divorce filing? First thing tomorrow morning. I'll have the papers served by noon. Standard no-fault dissolution, seeking division of assets based on individual contributions to marital property. Which means I keep everything because I contributed everything. Essentially. Though his lawyers will argue otherwise. They'll claim he provided emotional support, managed household duties, acted as your partner in social situations. He did none of those things. Doesn't matter. They'll argue it anyway. Be prepared for character attacks. They'll try to paint you as a manipulative liar who deceived her husband for money. Lena laughed bitterly. I had all the money. I was hiding it from him, not trying to get his. Again, doesn't matter. They'll spin whatever narrative serves their purposes. We just need to be ready with documentation that counters everything they claim. You have all the documentation you need. I do. One more thing. Harold paused. This is going to get ugly, Lena. Public, ugly, potentially traumatic. Richard is humiliated. His family is panicking. People in that state do desperate things. Make sure you have security. Make sure your staff knows to be careful. And please, for the love of everything, don't communicate with Richard directly anymore. Everything goes through me. Understood. Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow starts the real battle. After Harold hung up, Lena set her phone down and stared at it like it might offer some insight into her future. 6 months ago, when she'd first discovered Richard's affair, she'd imagined this moment. The relief of finally being honest, finally being seen. She'd imagined feeling free. Instead, she felt exhausted. And a little scared. And uncertain about everything that came next. Second thoughts. Grace asked gently. No. But I'm realizing that ending something is just the beginning of ending it, if that makes sense. Tonight was the announcement. Now comes months of legal proceedings, public scrutiny, rebuilding my life from scratch. You're not starting from scratch. You have Morrison Holdings. You have people who respect you. You have resources most people can only dream of. I have things. That's different from having a life. Grace was quiet for a moment. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? Not for the company, not for Richard, not to maintain appearances. Just for you? Lena couldn't remember. 5 years ago, maybe. Before Richard, before the marriage, before she'd started living a double life. Back when she was just herself, grieving but honest, alone but authentic. I don't know, she admitted. Then maybe that's what comes next. Finding out who Lena Morrison is when she's not playing any roles at all. That sounds terrifying. It sounds necessary. Lena finished her tea and stood, walking back to the windows. The city stretched out below her like a promise. Millions of people living their truths, making their mistakes, finding their way. She'd spent 5 years trying to be someone Richard could love. Someone small enough to fit into his world, quiet enough not to threaten his ego, malleable enough to shape herself around his needs. And in doing so, she'd lost track of who she actually was beneath all those accommodations. Tomorrow the divorce proceedings would start. Her identity would be fully public. Everyone would know that Lena Morrison was one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the business world. The press would dissect her marriage, her choices, her every move. But tonight, standing alone in her penthouse in her red dress with the city lights below and the quiet around her, Lena made herself a promise. She would never make herself small again. Never hide her truth to make someone else comfortable. Never pretend to be less than she was to preserve someone else's ego. She'd done that once. It had cost her 5 years and a marriage and countless hours of slowly disappearing into the background of her own life. Never again. You're right, she said to Grace. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for anyone. When I'm just me. Any idea where to start? Lena smiled. Actually, yes. I want to go through my father's old files. The personal ones, not just the business documents. He left me letters, journals, advice. I put them aside after he died because reading them hurt too much. But maybe it's time to see what he wanted me to know. That sounds like a good place to start. They talked for another hour, planning the logistics of the coming weeks. Grace would handle media relations, coordinate with legal, manage the increased scrutiny on Morrison Holdings. Lena would focus on running the company, maintaining stability, proving that her personal life wasn't affecting her professional competence. And in the quiet moments between obligations, she'd start rediscovering herself. Around midnight, Grace finally left. Lena locked the door behind her and stood in her empty penthouse. Her space. Her sanctuary. The place where she could finally stop performing and just exist. She changed out of her red dress and into comfortable clothes. Washed off her makeup. Let down her hair. Looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone familiar but long forgotten. The woman she'd been before Richard. The woman she was becoming again. Her phone buzzed one more time. Another message from Richard, angrier now. Richard, this is fraud. You'll pay for embarrassing me like this. My lawyers will destroy you. Lena deleted it without responding. His threats were empty. His lawyers would try, certainly, but they'd lose. Because Lena had done nothing illegal. She'd just been more successful than her husband had realized. That wasn't fraud. That was just life. She climbed into bed in her home, and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. Not quite contentment. But something close. She'd told the truth. She'd reclaimed her identity. She'd started the process of building a life that wasn't based on deception or accommodation or making herself smaller for someone else's comfort. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Legal battles and press intrusions and probably more angry messages from Richard. But tomorrow would also bring opportunities. A chance to lead Morrison Holdings openly. A chance to be fully herself in every aspect of her life. A chance to discover what authentic existence felt like after years of performance. Lena closed her eyes and for the first time in months, slept deeply and dreamlessly. No anxiety dreams about being discovered. No nightmares about Richard finding out her secrets. No stress about maintaining 2 separate lives. Just sleep. Just rest. Just peace. The battle ahead would be difficult. But she was ready for it. Because she wasn't fighting alone anymore. She wasn't hiding who she was or apologizing for her success or trying to be someone she wasn't. She was Lena Morrison. CEO, businesswoman, daughter of Thomas Morrison. Wealthy beyond measure and powerful beyond Richard's comprehension. And for the first time in 5 years, she was free to be exactly that. The divorce papers were served at 9:47 a.m. Lena knew the exact time because Richard called her 30 seconds later, screaming into the phone before she could even say hello. This is insane. You're insane. I'm not signing these. Lena had been in her office at Morrison Tower, reviewing quarterly projections with her CFO. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. You don't have a choice, Richard. This is happening. We've been married for 5 years. You owe me more than a manila envelope dropped off by some stranger. I owe you nothing. You had an affair. You dismissed me publicly. You treated me like I was nothing for years. This marriage is over. Because you lied. Because you built our entire relationship on deception. I withheld information. You betrayed me. Those aren't equivalent. Richard's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're going to regret this. My lawyers are already tearing apart your claims. You can't just keep everything because you happen to inherit money. I didn't inherit money and then do nothing with it. I built Morrison Holdings into what it is today. You contributed nothing to that success. I contributed 5 years of my life. 5 years of supporting you, of being your husband, of giving you status and connections. Lena almost laughed. Status? Connections? Richard, I had both of those before I ever met you. I just didn't tell you about them. This is. He made a sound of frustration. You can't do this. I won't let you. You don't get a vote. Sign the papers or don't. Either way, this marriage is over. My lawyers will be in touch with yours to discuss terms. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear. With anger. With years of suppressed frustration finally finding release. Her assistant appeared at her elbow. Mrs. Morrison? Sorry, Ms. Morrison. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Thank you. I'll be right there. Lena took a moment to compose herself. The board meeting would be the first since her public reveal. The first time she'd sit at the head of the table as herself, not as a proxy vote or video conference participant. The first time they'd all see her as their actual CEO. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her emerald green suit, and walked into the boardroom with her head high. The board members stood when she entered. All of them, rising from their seats in a gesture of respect that made Lena's throat tight. These were people who'd worked with her father. Who doubted her at first. Who'd been proven wrong by 5 years of exceptional growth under her leadership. Good morning, she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Her father's seat, though it had been empty for 5 years while she led from the shadows. I appreciate you all adjusting to the sudden change in our normal procedures. Nonsense. Walter Chin, her father's oldest friend and the longest-serving board member, smiled warmly. We should have been meeting like this from the beginning. It's good to finally see you where you belong, Lena. Others nodded in agreement. The CFO passed out folders containing the agenda. The meeting proceeded normally, discussing quarterly results, upcoming projects, strategic initiatives. But there was an energy in the room that hadn't existed before. A sense of things clicking into place. Of truth replacing performance. Before we adjourn, Lena said at the end, I want to address the elephant in the room. My personal situation has become very public. I want to assure all of you that it will not impact Morrison Holdings' operations or stability. We're not concerned, Walter said firmly. We're more concerned about you. That's a hell of a thing you went through last night. I'm fine. Actually better than fine. It was long overdue. Your husband. Another board member, Patricia Wilson, hesitated. He's making statements to the press. Claiming you manipulated him, that you're unstable. Lena's jaw tightened. Let him talk. My lawyers are documenting everything. If he crosses any legal lines, we'll respond accordingly. But I'm not going to engage in a public mudslinging contest. Morrison Holdings' reputation is more important than defending myself against baseless accusations. Spoken like your father, Walter said quietly. Thomas always said the best response to lies was continued excellence. Let your work speak for you. After the meeting, Lena retreated to her office. It was the same office her father had used, though she'd updated some of the furnishings. His desk remained, solid oak that had witnessed decades of decisions. His chair, worn leather that still smelled faintly of his cologne. His view of the city, the empire he'd built spread out below. Grace knocked and entered without waiting for permission. You need to see this. She pulled up several news articles on Lena's computer. The headlines were explosive. Secret CO exposes cheating husband at own gala. Morrison Holdings heir reveals identity after 5 years of anonymity. Billionaire wife sends husband to back table at her own event. Some articles were sympathetic, praising Lena's business acumen and calling Richard out for his public dismissal of his wife. Others were more skeptical, questioning why she'd hidden her identity, suggesting there might be something suspicious about her motives. And then there were Richard's interviews. I feel betrayed, he told one reporter, his face the picture of wounded dignity. I thought we had a genuine partnership. Instead, my wife was living a secret life, lying to me every day. What kind of marriage is built on that foundation? Lena read the interview with something approaching amazement. He'd completely rewritten the narrative, positioning himself as the victim of her deception rather than the husband who'd cheated and publicly humiliated her. He's good at this, Grace said, spinning the story to make himself look sympathetic. He's been practicing his whole life. Being a Bennett is all about managing perception. What do you want to do? Nothing. Let him talk. The truth will come out eventually. And honestly, I don't care what the press thinks. I care about Morrison Holdings. I care about our employees. I care about continuing my father's legacy. Richard's opinion has zero impact on any of that. But as the day wore on, the press coverage intensified. Richard gave more interviews, each one painting Lena as cold, calculating, manipulative. Patricia appeared on a talk show, tearfully describing her concern for her troubled daughter-in-law, who was clearly not handling her grief over her father's death well. She never properly processed Thomas Morrison's passing, Patricia told the sympathetic host. And I think that trauma led her to make some very concerning choices. Hiding her identity from my son, living this double life, planning this public ambush. These aren't the actions of a healthy person. Lena watched the interview from her office, Grace standing beside her. By the end, she was gripping her desk so hard her knuckles had gone white. They're trying to say I'm mentally unstable, she said quietly. That's their angle. Not that Richard cheated. Not that he treated me terribly. That I'm emotionally unstable and my actions last night prove it. It's garbage. Everyone who knows you knows it's garbage. But everyone who doesn't know me will wonder. They'll see a wealthy woman who hid her identity and think there must be something wrong with her. Why else would she deceive her husband? Grace was quiet for a moment. You need to tell your side. Give an interview. Let people hear directly from you why you made the choices you made. I don't want to play their game. Then they get to define the narrative. Is that what you want? Lena looked out at the city. Morrison Tower stood tall in the financial district, a monument to her father's vision and her own hard work. She built something real here. Something that mattered. And now the Bennetts were trying to undermine it by attacking her credibility, her mental health, her character. Set up an interview, she said finally. Someone reputable. Someone who'll actually ask real questions instead of lobbing softballs designed to make me look bad. I know just the person. Jennifer Adams at Business Today. She did that incredible series on women in leadership last year. Make it happen. 3 hours later, Lena sat across from Jennifer Adams in a conference room at Morrison Tower. The journalist was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and professional, with a reputation for fair but tough reporting. Thank you for agreeing to this, Jennifer said as her cameraman set up. I know you must be overwhelmed. I'm functioning. That's about all I can claim right now. Let's start with the obvious question. Why did you hide your identity from your husband? Lena had prepared for this. Had practiced her answer with grace until it sounded natural rather than rehearsed. When my father died, I was 27 and suddenly responsible for a multi-billion-dollar company. The scrutiny was intense. Everyone had opinions about whether I was ready, whether I could handle it, whether a young woman could possibly fill Thomas Morrison's shoes. I needed space to prove myself on merit, without every decision being filtered through people's perceptions of my age or gender or grief. But why hide it from your husband specifically? Because I wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't about money or power. I met Richard at a time when I was vulnerable. I just lost my father. I was drowning in responsibility. And here was someone who saw me as just Lena. Not as an heiress or a CEO. Just as a person. I wanted to protect that. To see if we could build something real without the complications of wealth. Did you succeed? Lena smiled sadly. No, obviously not. But I think we were doomed regardless. Richard wanted a wife who supported his ambitions without competing with them. I was never going to be that person, whether I'd told him about Morrison Holdings or not. Your husband and his family are claiming you're mentally unstable. That hiding your identity was a sign of deeper psychological issues. They're claiming that because it shifts blame away from Richard's affair and his public dismissal of me at my own event. It's easier to paint me as unstable than to admit he treated me poorly. Did he treat you poorly? Yes. Not physically but emotionally. He became critical, distant, dismissive. He had an affair. He publicly humiliated me by sending me to sit in the back of the ballroom while his mistress sat in my seat. Those aren't the actions of a loving husband. Jennifer leaned forward. Some people are saying you planned last night as revenge. That the whole gala was designed to humiliate your husband. It wasn't designed to humiliate him. It was designed to announce Morrison Holdings' new direction and my identity as CEO. Richard chose to attend. Richard chose to dismiss me. Richard chose to prioritize his mistress over his wife. I simply let him make those choices in a very public setting where he couldn't later deny them. That's cold. That's strategic. I spent 5 years being dismissed, ignored, treated like an inconvenience. I wasn't going to end my marriage quietly while Richard controlled the narrative and positioned himself as the victim. I needed one moment of absolute clarity where everyone saw the truth of our dynamic. That's what last night was. The interview continued for another hour. Jennifer asked tough questions about the deception, the timing, the impact on Morrison Holdings. Lena answered each one honestly, not trying to spin herself as perfect but refusing to accept blame for Richard's choices. When it was over, Jennifer turned off the camera and studied Lena thoughtfully. Off the record? Your husband is an idiot. You're brilliant, successful, and stunning. The fact that he couldn't see what he had is his loss. Thank you. On the record? This interview is going to help. People need to hear your perspective. But be prepared. The Bennetts aren't going to stop attacking you just because you defended yourself once. I know. But I'm done being silent about who I am and what I've accomplished. If they want a fight, they'll get one. Lena returned to her office to find 3 messages from Richard's lawyer. Each one more aggressive than the last, demanding meetings, threatening legal action, claiming Richard was entitled to half of everything Lena owned. She forwarded them all to Harold Sterling without responding. By evening, the interview had been posted online. Within an hour, it has. Some people sympathized with Lena's position. Others still questioned her motives. But the narrative was shifting, becoming more balanced. Grace called around 8 p.m. Have you seen the trending topics? I try to avoid social media. Well, #TruthNotTrauma is trending. People are pushing back against Patricia's mentally unstable narrative. They're pointing out that hiding your identity to avoid gold diggers isn't crazy, it's smart. That's something, I guess. It's more than something. You're winning the public opinion battle. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay calm, stay honest, let your work speak for itself. After Grace hung up, Lena stood at her office windows looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably fuming. Patricia was probably strategizing. Candace was probably wishing she'd never gotten involved with a married man. And Lena? She was tired. Exhausted, really. But also oddly at peace. The fallout from her revelation was intense. The divorce would be messy. The public scrutiny would continue. But she was done hiding. Done pretending. Done being someone she wasn't to please people who didn't value her. She was Lena Morrison, CEO, businesswoman, truth teller. Powerful, successful, and finally visible. And that was enough. 2 months had passed since the gala. 2 months of legal meetings, press interviews, and carefully managed public appearances. 2 months of Richard's lawyers trying and failing to claim any portion of Morrison Holdings. 2 months of Patricia's increasingly desperate attempts to paint Lena as unstable while the evidence mounted against her son. The divorce was progressing. Not quickly because Richard was fighting every single point, but steadily. Harold Sterling was methodical, producing document after document proving that Lena had built and maintained Morrison Holdings entirely independently of her marriage. He's trying to claim emotional contribution, Harold explained during one of their weekly meetings, arguing that his support during your father's death entitled him to compensation. He barely knew me during my father's death. We'd only been dating a few months. I know. His lawyers are grasping at straws. But it means this is going to drag on for a while longer. Another 3 months at least. Lena had expected as much. The Bennetts didn't give up easily. But she could wait. She had resources they couldn't match and truth on her side. What surprised her was how good it felt to be openly herself. No more hiding her business calls from Richard. No more pretending her days were spent shopping when she was actually in board meetings. No more careful compartmentalization of her life into wife Lena and CEO Lena. She was just Lena. One person. Whole and honest and visible. Morrison Holdings was thriving under her open leadership. Morale among employees had improved dramatically when they could finally acknowledge their actual CEO. Projects moved faster without the need for layers of secrecy. Strategic partnerships formed more easily when Lena could represent the company directly instead of through proxies. It's remarkable, Walter Chin said during a board meeting. I knew you were doing excellent work before, but there's something different now. An energy. It's authenticity, Lena replied. Pretending takes effort. Being yourself is effortless. The foundation in her father's name had launched successfully. Morrison Foundation would provide funding and mentorship to young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. The first round of applications had generated over 2,000 responses. Grace was helping coordinate the selection committee, bringing her characteristic efficiency to the process. "These stories are incredible," Grace told Lena one afternoon, spreading applications across the conference table. Single mothers starting businesses. Immigrant entrepreneurs with amazing ideas but no access to capital. Young people who remind me of your father's early days. Lena reviewed the applications, moved by the ambition and hope in every proposal. This was her father's legacy. Not just the company but the commitment to creating opportunities for people who'd been overlooked by traditional systems. "Fund all of them," she said impulsively. Grace looked up, startled. "All 2,000? Start with the top 500. Give them what they need to build sustainable businesses. Then evaluate results and fund more next quarter." "That's an enormous commitment. Millions of dollars." "That's the point. We have millions of dollars. Let's use them to create real change instead of hoarding them." Grace smiled. "Your father would love this." The Sustainable Urban Development Initiative was also moving forward. Lena had assembled a team of architects, urban planners, environmental scientists, and community organizers. They were reimagining what cities could be when designed with both people and planet in mind. "We're not just building green buildings," she explained to a reporter during another interview. "We're creating spaces where people can actually thrive. Affordable housing near public transit. Community gardens integrated into residential areas. Renewable energy systems that make neighborhoods self-sufficient. This is about sustainability in every sense of the word." The project garnered significant media attention. Positive attention for once, focused on Lena's vision rather than her personal drama. But the drama wasn't entirely gone. She ran into Richard at a business event 3 months after the gala. Literally ran into him, turning a corner at the convention center and nearly colliding with his chest. "Lena." He stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. Candace wasn't with him. Lena had heard through various sources that their relationship had imploded spectacularly once Candace realized Richard had no actual power or money of his own. "Richard." They stood in the hallway, people flowing around them, both uncertain how to navigate this accidental encounter. "You look well," he said finally. "I am well. You?" "Managing." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" Lena checked her watch. She had 15 minutes before her panel discussion started. "Sure." They found a quiet alcove away from the main traffic flow. Richard looked different than he had at the gala. Thinner. Tired. Less polished around the edges. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for how I treated you. Not just that night but for years before. You deserved better." Lena studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine or another manipulation. "Why now?" "Because I've had time to think. Time to realize how badly I screwed up. You were right about everything. I was threatened by you. Intimidated. And instead of dealing with that maturely, I made you feel small. Yes, you did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to apologize. But I needed to say it. You were an incredible partner. I was just too insecure to appreciate it." Lena felt something in her chest loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like closure. "Thank you for saying that. I'm not fighting the divorce anymore. I told my lawyers to settle. You should keep everything. It was always yours anyway." "Richard, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. It's the right thing to do. Maybe the first right thing I've done in years." He smiled sadly. "I hope you find someone who appreciates you, who isn't threatened by your success. You deserve that." He walked away before Lena could respond. She stood in the alcove, processing the unexpected apology, feeling lighter than she had in months. Maybe Richard wasn't entirely irredeemable. Maybe people could learn, grow, become better versions of themselves. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it offered a different ending than she'd expected. Not a happy ending, but an honest one. The panel discussion went well. Lena spoke about sustainable development and entrepreneurship support with passion and clarity. People in the audience leaned forward, engaged by her vision. Afterward, several business leaders approached her with partnership proposals, investment opportunities, collaborative projects. This was who she was now. Not Richard Bennett's wife. Not the hidden CEO. Just Lena Morrison, leader and visionary in her own right. That evening, she attended a networking dinner. She wore a royal blue dress that made her feel powerful and beautiful. No longer hiding in the background, no longer trying to blend in. She stood at the center of conversations, confident in her expertise, unafraid to take up space. You've transformed and met at previous events, though they'd never really talked beyond pleasantries. I stopped pretending to be someone else. It shows. You're radiant. Lena smiled. Radiant. She'd take that. Later, walking to her car through the convention center's parking garage, she found herself humming. Actually humming, something she hadn't done in years. There was joy bubbling up inside her, pure and unexpected. She'd survived the scandal. Survived the divorce proceedings. Survived her marriage falling apart in the most public way possible. And not only survived but thrived. Morrison Holdings was stronger than ever. Her reputation as a business leader was solidifying. Her initiatives were making real differences in people's lives. And she was genuinely happy for the first time she could remember. Her phone rang. Grace's name appeared on the screen. Please tell me you're not working this late, Lena answered. I'm not working. I'm calling as your friend. My brother's in town. Adrian. Remember I mentioned him? The entrepreneur? The one who started that tech education nonprofit. That's the one. He's giving a talk tomorrow night about accessible technology education. I thought you might want to come. Network a bit. He's doing interesting work that might align with Morrison Foundation. Send me the details. I'll be there. Bring an open mind. What does that mean? Nothing. Just bring an open mind. Grace hung up before Lena could press further. She smiled, that for weeks now, dropping hints that Lena should put herself out there and meet new people. Grace meant well, but Lena wasn't interested in dating. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She was too focused on rebuilding her life, her company, herself. Still, she could attend a talk about technology education. That was professional, not personal. Just networking. Just learning about potential partnership opportunities. Just a normal Tuesday evening in her new, authentic life. As Lena drove home to her penthouse, the city lights twinkling around her, she thought about how far she'd come. From that night at the gala when Richard dismissed her to now. 2 months that felt like a lifetime of change. She'd reclaimed her name. Reclaimed her identity. Reclaimed her power. And in doing so, she discovered something unexpected. She liked herself. Genuinely liked who she was when she stopped trying to fit into someone else's expectations. Liked the leader she was becoming. Liked the vision she had for Morrison Holdings and the impact it could have on the world. Richard's apology had been unexpected, but it didn't change anything fundamental. The marriage had been broken long before the affair, long before the gala. They'd been two people trying to fit together when their shapes were incompatible. Now Lena was her own shape. Whole, strong, unapologetically herself. And that was more than enough. She pulled into her building's garage, took the private elevator to her penthouse, and stepped into her sanctuary. Her space. Her home. The place where she could finally, fully be Lena Morrison without pretense or performance. Tomorrow she'd attend Adrian's talk. Next week she'd finalize the foundation's first round of grants. Next month she'd break ground on the first sustainable development project. Her calendar was full of meaningful work, genuine connections, real impact. The divorce would finalize eventually. The press would move on to new scandals. Life would continue its forward momentum. And Lena? She'd be right here, leading Morrison Holdings, honoring her father's legacy, and building a future that was entirely her own. Reclaimed, renewed, and ready for whatever came next. The auditorium was more crowded than Lena had expected. Adrian Torres's reputation apparently preceded him. Grace had mentioned he was doing innovative work in technology education, but Lena hadn't realized he'd become something of a movement leader. Accessible Tech Initiative has trained over 50,000 people in the past 3 years, Grace explained as they found seats near the middle of the auditorium. They focus on underserved communities, teaching coding, digital literacy, and tech entrepreneurship. Adrian started it after watching his own neighborhood struggle with the digital divide. Impressive. Lena scanned the program. And he does this full-time? It's his life's work. He was a software engineer at one of the big tech companies, got tired of the corporate world, decided to make actual impact instead. The lights dimmed. A man walked onto the stage and Lena sat up straighter. Adrian Torres was handsome in an understated way. Tall, athletic build, warm brown skin, intelligent dark eyes behind simple glasses. He wore jeans and a green button-down shirt, looking more like someone's favorite professor than a tech entrepreneur. Good evening, he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. I'm Adrian, and I'm here to tell you why everything you think you know about technology education is probably wrong. Lena leaned forward, intrigued. For the next hour, Adrian dismantled common assumptions about who could succeed in tech, who deserved access to training, and what qualifications actually meant in a rapidly changing field. He showed videos of students from his programs. A single mother who learned to code, and now ran her own web development business. A formerly incarcerated man who'd become a sought-after cybersecurity consultant. A teenager from a rural community who'd built an app that connected farmers directly with consumers. Talent is everywhere, Adrian said, his passion evident. Opportunity is not. My job isn't to find talented people and train them. My job is to remove barriers so talent can find itself. The audience applauded. Lena found herself clapping harder than necessary, moved by his vision and the obvious results of his work. After the talk, there was a reception. Lena followed Grace through the crowd toward where Adrian stood surrounded by admirers and potential donors. Adrian. Grace hugged her brother warmly. You killed it up there. Thanks, Gracie. He smiled, then his eyes landed on Lena. And you must be the famous Lena Morrison. Grace talks about you constantly. I'm not famous. Just recently visible. Lena shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the genuine warmth in his expression. Visibility suits you. His smile was kind, not flirtatious. Grace mentioned you started a foundation. Morrison Foundation, right? Just launched a few months ago. Supporting young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. That's exactly the kind of work we need more of. Most entrepreneurs I train hit funding walls. They have the skills, the ideas, the drive. But traditional investors won't take a chance on them. That's the gap we're trying to fill. They talked for 30 minutes, the crowd around them thinning as people drifted away. Adrian was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions about Morrison Foundation's approach, sharing insights from his own work, suggesting potential collaboration opportunities. We should set up a proper meeting, he said eventually. Explore how our organizations might partner. Your funding plus our training infrastructure could be powerful. I'd like that. Lena pulled out her phone. What's your availability? They scheduled a meeting for the following week. Professional, straightforward, focused on their shared mission. Exactly the kind of interaction Lena appreciated. Grace appeared at her elbow as Adrian moved on to other conversations. So what? What did you think? He's impressive. His work aligns perfectly with what we're trying to do at Morrison Foundation. This could be a great partnership. Just a partnership? Grace's tone was teasing. What else would it be? Lena. My brother is single, accomplished, passionate about meaningful work, and if I may say so as his sister, quite attractive. I'm not dating Grace. I didn't say date him. I said notice that he exists as a human being who might be interesting beyond just a professional capacity. I noticed. He seems like a good person. But I'm not interested in romance. I'm barely through my divorce. Fair enough. Just keep an open mind. That phrase again. Lena shook her head, amused by Grace's transparent matchmaking attempt. But the truth was she wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. 5 years with Richard had been enough to make her cautious about trusting anyone with her heart again. The meeting with Adrian the following week went even better than expected. He came prepared with data, case studies, and specific proposals for how Morrison Foundation and Accessible Tech Initiative could collaborate. Here's what I'm thinking, Adrian said, spreading documents across the conference table. Your foundation funds the entrepreneurs. We provide the technical training and ongoing support. Together, we create a pipeline from education to employment to entrepreneurship. Lena reviewed his proposal. It was thorough, well-researched, and exactly the kind of comprehensive approach she believed in. This is excellent work. I've been developing it for months. Just needed the right partner to make it viable. They spent 3 hours hammering out details. Adrian was sharp, collaborative, willing to adjust his vision to align with Morrison Foundation's goals. By the end of the meeting, they'd outlined a pilot program that would launch in 3 months. To new partnerships. Adrian raised his coffee mug in a toast. To removing barriers. Lena clinked her mug against his. Over the following weeks, Lena and Adrian worked closely together. Conference calls, planning sessions, site visits to communities where the program would launch. He was professional, respectful, treating her as an equal partner rather than just a funding source. And somewhere along the way, Lena realized she was looking forward to their meetings. Not just for the work, but for the conversation. Adrian was thoughtful, funny, genuinely interested in her perspectives. He asked about Morrison Holdings, about her father's legacy, about her vision for the future. But he never pried into her personal life, never brought up the very public divorce unless she mentioned it first. You're different than I expected, she told him one afternoon as they toured a community center that would house part of their program. How so? Most people who meet me now, they see the billionaire CEO first. The scandal, the divorce, the drama. You just see me. I see a person doing important work. That's what matters. Was refreshing. Genuine. Exactly what Lena needed as she continued rebuilding her life. 6 months after the gala, the divorce was finally finalized. Richard had dropped his claims once he'd seen the overwhelming documentation proving Lena had built everything independently. The settlement was clean, simple. They divided the few assets they'd accumulated together, but everything related to Morrison Holdings remained solely Lena's. Harold Sterling called with the news. It's done. You're officially divorced. Lena sat in her office looking out at the city. I don't feel any different. That's normal. The marriage ended long before the paperwork caught up. After Harold hung up, Lena sat quietly for a while. She'd expected to feel something. Relief, sadness, maybe vindication. Instead, she felt nothing. The marriage was a chapter that had closed months ago. This was just paperwork making it official. Grace knocked and entered. I heard. You okay? I'm fine. Actually fine, not pretending fine. Want to do something to celebrate? Or commiserate? Whatever feels appropriate. I want to work. I want to keep building the life I'm creating. That feels like the right way to mark this moment. That's very you. Grace smiled. Though for the record, you're also allowed to take a day off and just feel whatever you feel. I'll feel it while I work. That's my version of processing. Morrison Holdings was approaching its most successful year yet. The foundation had funded its first round of entrepreneurs, with remarkable early results. The Sustainable Development Project had broken ground in 3 cities. The partnership with Adrian's organization was exceeding every benchmark they'd set. And Lena? She was genuinely happy. Not the performed happiness she tried to maintain during her marriage. Real, deep contentment with her life and her choices. At a foundation event 2 weeks after the divorce finalized, Adrian pulled her aside. I have something to tell you and I want to be upfront about it. Lena's stomach tightened. Okay. I think you're incredible. As a leader, as a person, as a partner in this work we're doing together. And I'd like to get to know you better. Outside of work. If you're interested. It was the most straightforward, honest statement of interest Lena had ever received. No games, no manipulation, no hidden agendas. Just clarity. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, she said carefully. My divorce just finalized. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of my marriage. I understand. And I'm not trying to pressure you. I just wanted you to know how I feel so you could consider it if and when you're ready. No rush. No expectations. Thank you. For being honest. For being patient. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. They continued working together. Adrian didn't change his behavior, didn't press for more than Lena was willing to give. He simply existed as a steady, supportive presence in her life. Someone who valued her for who she actually was. And slowly, tentatively, Lena started to imagine possibilities. Not rushing into anything, not trying to replace what she'd had with Richard. Just opening herself to the idea that maybe, eventually, there could be room in her life for more than just work. But that was for later. For now, she was focused on the empire she was building. The legacy she was creating. The life she was living authentically for the first time in years. She was Lena Morrison. CEO, philanthropist, leader. Divorced, independent, powerful. And for the first time she could remember, genuinely excited about what came next. 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Lena stood in the same ballroom. The grand ballroom at Morrison Tower, transformed once again for the annual Morrison Holdings Gala. But this time, everything was different. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that made her feel like royalty. Not hiding in red at the back of the room, but standing at the front in a color that announced her presence. Her natural hair fell in elegant waves around her shoulders. Diamond earrings her father had given her for her 25th birthday caught the light. Grace stood beside her, reviewing last-minute details. Everything's ready. The program starts in 15 minutes. Thank you. For everything you've done this year. Are you getting emotional on me? Grace's eyes sparkled with affection. Because I will absolutely cry and ruin my makeup. I'm just grateful. You've been more than an assistant. You've been my anchor through all of this. That's what family does. And we are family, Lena. You, me, Adrian. We're building something real together. Adrian. Lena's lips curved into a smile at his name. 3 months ago, after careful consideration and many long conversations, she'd agreed to go on a date with him. Just dinner, nothing elaborate. They talked for 4 hours at a quiet restaurant about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes. He'd walked her to her car at the end of the night and asked if he could see her again. Yes, she'd said. Simple, clear, honest. Their relationship was developing slowly. No rushing, no pressure, no trying to force something that might not be ready. Just two people getting to know each other, enjoying each other's company, building something genuine. He was here tonight, somewhere in the crowd. Not as her date officially, but as a partner in the foundation's work. The pilot program they'd launched had been so successful they were expanding it nationally. Hundreds of people were receiving technology training, entrepreneurship support, and funding to build their dreams. The ballroom was filling now. Board members from Morrison Holdings. Business partners. Philanthropists interested in supporting the foundation. Reporters covering the company's continued success. And notably absent, any member of the Bennett family. Patricia had tried to get an invitation through various connections. Lena had politely but firmly declined. This was her event, her company, her life. The Bennetts no longer had any place in it. Jeffrey Santos approached the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Morrison Holdings Gala. The lights dimmed. Lena took a deep breath, preparing for her entrance. But this time she wasn't walking from the back to reclaim her space. She was starting at the front, where she belonged. Last year, Jeffrey continued, we had quite the dramatic evening. Tonight, I'm happy to report, will be substantially less shocking, though hopefully just as meaningful. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Everyone remembered last year. The revelation, the scandal, the divorce. But all of that felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. This year, we celebrate not revelation, but results. Under CEO Lena Morrison's leadership, Morrison Holdings has achieved record growth. But more importantly, we've redefined what corporate success means. The screens behind the stage came to life. Images of the sustainable development projects. Low-income families moving into beautiful, affordable homes. Community gardens flourishing. Solar panels powering entire neighborhoods. We've created not just housing but communities. Not just buildings but hope. More images. The foundation's entrepreneurs. People who'd gone from unemployment to running successful businesses. Single parents supporting their families. Formerly incarcerated individuals building new futures. Young people from underserved communities becoming industry leaders. We've invested not just money but belief. Not just funding but partnership. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. This was her father's dream, realized and expanded. This was proof that business could be more than profit. That success could be measured in lives changed, communities transformed, dreams fulfilled. Please welcome Morrison Holdings CEO, Lena Morrison. Lena walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The entire room stood, hundreds of people acknowledging her leadership, her vision, her impact. Not because she'd hidden her identity, not because she'd survived a scandal, but because she'd done meaningful work that mattered. She gripped the podium, looking out at the crowd. She found Adrian near the middle, his warm smile encouraging. Found Grace in the wings, giving her a thumbs up. Found Walter Chin in the front row, looking like a proud father. Thank you, Lena began. Last year I stood on this stage and told you who I was. Tonight, I want to tell you who we're becoming. She spoke about Morrison Holdings' vision for the next 5 years. Expanding sustainable development to 20 cities. Growing the foundation to support 10,000 entrepreneurs. Creating a model for corporate responsibility that other companies could follow. My father built this company on a simple principle. Wealth means nothing if it doesn't create opportunity for others. He believed that success wasn't measured by what you accumulated, but by what you enabled others to achieve. The image on the screen changed to a photo of Thomas Morrison. Young, vibrant, standing in front of his first property investment. Lena's throat tightened. I miss him every day, but I feel his presence in this work. In every family we house. In every entrepreneur we fund. In every life we touch through our initiatives. His legacy isn't just Morrison Holdings. It's the belief that we all have a responsibility to lift others as we climb. More applause. Lena waited for it to subside. This year has taught me many things. I've learned that hiding who you are doesn't protect you. It diminishes you. I've learned that truth, even painful truth, is always better than comfortable lies. And I've learned that the strongest foundation for any endeavor is authenticity. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I spent 5 years pretending to be someone smaller than I was. Trying to fit into a life that never actually fit me. And when that life fell apart publicly and dramatically, I thought I'd be devastated. Instead, I was freed. Nods of understanding throughout the audience. Many of these people had followed her story, had watched her navigate the divorce and scandal, had seen her emerge stronger. I tell you this not for sympathy but as context. Because Morrison Holdings' success this year isn't just about smart business decisions. It's about leading from a place of honesty. About building an empire not on secrets and performance, but on genuine values and authentic vision. The screens showed more results. Statistics on job creation, environmental impact, community development. Numbers that represented real lives, real change, real hope. So tonight, I don't stand here asking you to see me. You already do. Instead, I ask you to see what we're building together. An empire of opportunity. A legacy of impact. A future where success means something more than personal wealth. Lena raised her glass. The audience did the same. To my father who showed me what leadership looks like. To the team at Morrison Holdings who turned vision into reality. To our foundation partners who believe in second chances and first opportunities. And to everyone in this room who chooses to use their resources, their platforms, their privilege to create meaningful change. Thank you. The applause was deafening. People stood again, some wiping their eyes, others smiling widely. Lena stepped away from the microphone, feeling lighter than she had in years. As she descended from the stage, Adrian was waiting at the bottom. He didn't say anything, just squeezed her hand briefly before stepping back. That was enough. His presence, his support, his understanding of when she needed space and when she needed connection. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations. Business leaders wanting to discuss partnerships. Philanthropists interested in supporting the foundation. Journalists asking about next year's plans. Lena moved through it all with grace and confidence, fully herself in every interaction. At one point, she found herself near the table where Richard had dismissed her last year. She stood there for a moment, remembering that feeling of humiliation, of being sent to the back while her own husband's mistress took her place. How small she'd felt then. How invisible. And how completely that had changed. Quite the transformation, Walter Chin said, appearing at her elbow. From that moment to this one. I was always this person, Lena replied. I just stopped hiding it. Your father would be so proud. Not just of what you've built, but of how you've built it. With integrity. With purpose. With heart. I learned from the best. And now you're teaching others. That's the true measure of success. The gala continued late into the evening. When it finally ended, when the last guests had left and the staff was cleaning up, Lena stood once more in the empty ballroom. Grace and Adrian joined her, the three of them looking around at the space that had witnessed so much change. You did it, Grace said quietly. You took something painful and transformed it into something beautiful. We did it, Lena corrected. This isn't my success. It's ours. Everyone who believed in this vision. Everyone who chose to build rather than tear down. Still, Adrian added, you're the one who had the courage to be honest. To stand up here a year ago and reclaim your identity. That took real strength. Lena thought about that. About standing at the back of this room in her red dress, watching her husband wave her away. About the moment she'd decided enough was enough. About walking to this stage and telling everyone who she really was. It had felt necessary then. Unavoidable. Like she'd been building toward that moment for 5 years without realizing it. Now, a year later, she understood it differently. That moment hadn't been about Richard or the divorce or even Morrison Holdings. It had been about her. About Lena Morrison finally choosing herself after years of choosing everyone else. I think I'm ready to go home, she said. They walked to the parking garage together. Adrian had driven separately, but he walked them to Grace's car anyway. Thank you for being here tonight, Lena told him. Where else would I be? He smiled. This is important work. You're important. To me. It was a simple statement, but it meant everything. After 5 years with someone who'd made her feel invisible, Adrian saw her. Really saw her. Valued her. Chose her. Coffee tomorrow? She asked. I have some ideas about expanding the program to rural communities. It's a date. Well, a meeting. Well, both if you want it to be. Lena laughed. Both sounds good. She watched him walk to his car, then turned to Grace. I'm happy. I know. It radiates from you. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? Just genuinely content with your life? That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like. They drove back to Lena's penthouse in comfortable silence. When Grace dropped her off, Lena stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at her building. Her home. Her sanctuary. The place where she could be completely herself without performance or pretense. Inside, she changed out of her emerald gown into comfortable clothes. Made herself tea. Stood at her windows looking out at the city that glittered below. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably living his own life now. Dating, working, figuring out who he was outside of their failed marriage. Lena hoped he was finding his way, becoming a better person, learning from their mistakes. Patricia was probably still trying to restore the Bennett family's reputation after the scandal. Let her try. It didn't affect Lena anymore. Candace had disappeared from public view entirely. Lena occasionally wondered what had happened to her, then stopped wondering because it truly didn't matter. All of that was the past. Ancient history. A life Lena had lived but no longer inhabited. This was her life now. Morrison Holdings, thriving under her open leadership. The foundation changing lives daily. The sustainable development projects, creating communities. Her partnership with Adrian, both professional and personal, growing into something real and healthy. And most importantly, herself. Lena Morrison, fully present, completely honest, unapologetically authentic. She'd built an empire. Not just of money and property and corporate success, though those existed. But an empire of purpose, impact, meaning. An empire where success was measured not in dollars but in lives transformed. Where power meant the ability to lift others up rather than hold them down. This was what her father had dreamed of. What he'd worked toward his entire life. And Lena had taken that dream and made it bigger, broader, more inclusive. She raised her tea mug toward the city, toward the memory of her father, toward the future she was creating. We did it, Dad. We really did it. The city twinkled back at her, millions of lights representing millions of lives. And somewhere in all that vast possibility, Lena Morrison had found exactly where she belonged. Not at the back of someone else's ballroom. Not hiding who she was to make others comfortable. Not diminishing herself to fit into someone else's vision of who she should be. Right here. Front and center in her own life. Building, creating, leading, loving. Visible, powerful, authentic, free. This was her empire. Built on truth, sustained by purpose, crowned with genuine happiness. And it was more than enough.